Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the last airbenders and got harem? Huge shout out to THECHAMP123 for this story. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. For nearly over 100 years, the bending nations have been plagued by a great and terrible war. A war started by Fire Lord Sazin, once a close friend of Avatar Roku. The Fire Lord had a plan to make sure the next Avatar, an airbender, wouldn't be a threat. He would wipe out all the air nomads during the Great Comet Festival and begin his plan for total domination. What the Fire Lord did not take into account was the Avatar to go missing during his attack. What Sazin also failed to know was that a hidden airbending tribe had been spared from the massacre. They were considered outcasts by the other nomads, for they followed the ways of Yangchen and the great Guru Lagima. This particular group of nomads found new teachings and even ways to their bending, understanding there are times where one must take a life, but only in the pursuit of protecting another. But upon hearing what had happened to their fellow air nomads, the last remaining airbenders went into hiding to protect themselves and their culture from the war. As 100 years passed, the nomads began to lose their monk-like ways, following tradition less and less. The hardest loss was saying goodbye to their sky bisons, all in the name of survival. Today, the airbenders follow a new philosophy while still respecting and honoring most of the traditions of the past. They continue to hide and wait for the Avatar to return and restore balance to the world once more. High in the mountaintops, far above the clouds, was a great bonsai tree that had grown on the outside of a towering eminence. Its branches were curled and thick, while its leaves were green and bountiful. Laying on a particularly large branch with his leg dangling off the side was a young man who seemed no older than 16. His crimson hair stood out strongly with his sapphire blue eyes that almost matched that of waterbenders in their intensity. Clothed in black and grey martial artist robes was an airbending prodigy named Naruto. Naruto was the only one of his age in his village, everyone else being young children, middle-aged adults and the elderly. For a while, the air nomads struggled to have children, and the birth rate declined heavily. Naruto's parents died before he was born, taken by a great plague. The more spiritual and elderly members of the village suggested it was an attack by an angered spirit. Others simply thought of it as nothing more than a terrible sickness, and they lacked access to waterbenders for healing. Whatever the case was, that was the past in Naruto's mind. What he focused on now was the future, or, more precisely, the present. In Naruto's hand was a book filled with poems and words of wisdom from Guru Lagima, the first and only known airbender to achieve flight. It was a shared dream and instinct through all airbenders to achieve flight and soar through the skies, but to do so without a glider or a sky bison was said to be impossible, but Guru Lagima did the impossible. But how did the great Guru do it? Many had pondered this question, no one more so than Naruto himself. The young airbending master repeated the words of the wise bending master to himself, saying, "Let go of your earthly tethers. Enter the void. Empty and become wind." Naruto frowned as he wondered what Guru meant. What counted as an earthly tether? Possessions. People you surround yourself with and care for. Naruto didn't think so, at least. Lagima was known as wise, that was true, but he was also known for being kind, a great teacher, and even a little bit of a prankster. He still cared for his fellow nomads even after discovering flight. Enter the void, Naruto muttered to himself. Was it possible the earthly tethers were negative emotions or perhaps emotions in general? It made the crimson-haired airbender wonder if entering the void meant finding balance and control within himself, letting go of anything that was holding him back from becoming free, like his bending element. Become wind. New growth cannot exist without first the destruction of the old. Naruto wondered if that implied to himself and if he was holding himself back. The crimson-haired teen sat up and closed his book with a sigh. He stared up at the great blue sky with sad eyes. It was times like this he couldn't help but feel selfish. Selfish because he wanted to leave and explore everything the bending nations had to offer. He wanted to see and experience the world, danger included. Naruto wanted to live and be free, but he knew he couldn't. It wasn't outright said, but everyone expected Naruto to become the next leader of the airbenders, taking the current leader of the village, Asuma's, place when the time was right. He had responsibilities that he knew he couldn't just shrug off, and Naruto was needed by too many people who he couldn't let down. He was needed here, not out there. That was what he tried to tell himself, at least. Big bro. The crimson-haired airbender sat up and looked over to the cliffside, seeing a young boy with spiky brown hair and a scarf that was far too large for him. The young child gave a grin, showing he was missing some of his teeth thanks to his own youth. The scarf-wearing boy cupped his hands, taking a deep breath before once again shouting, "Hey, big bro. Yo, Konohamaru." Naruto waved, using his bending to leap off the tree with grace, touching the mountain ground as lightly as a leaf that had fallen from a tree. The young airbending master tousled Konohamaru's spiky brown locks as he asked, "Did Asuma send you to fetch me?" "Yeah, said he needed you for something," Konohamaru said half-heartedly before staring up at his big brother figure with determined eyes, clapping his hands together in prayer as he bowed his head, nearly shouting as he pleaded, "Please teach me some cool airbending moves." Naruto couldn't help but crack a smile and arch a brow, asking, "Didn't I teach you some cool airbending moves yesterday?" Konohamaru couldn't hide his sheepish grin as he kicked at the dirt. "Yeah, but I wanna learn more." "Master Asuma can't teach you anything?" The Crimson Airbender questioned, rolling his eyes when his fellow bender looked away shyly. "I mean, Uncle is great, but he's not cool like you." Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at Konohamaru's explanation. It didn't take a genius to realize the kid just wanted to spend time with someone he admired and looked up to. "I'll see if I can teach you something new later, alright?" Naruto said, finding himself mimicking Konohamaru's bright grin. "Yes. You're the best big bro." The younger bender praised, nearly tripping over his own scarf as he did so. Naruto couldn't pull back the beepy grin on his lips as he scratched his cheek, saying, "Yeah, I know I am." Traveling across mountain terrain would have been near difficult to near impossible for regular people and benders alike, but for those gifted with the ability for air. It was no problem to leap great distances, fall from impeccable heights, and catch yourself with grace. Naruto and Konohamaru both stood at the edge of a different cliffside, looking down past the clouds with squinted eyes. A heavy wind tousled their hair along with Konohamaru's scarf. The older teen looked down at his younger companion before pointing towards his back. Konohamaru, immediately understanding what Naruto was asking, leapt onto his older brother figure's back, wrapping his tiny arms around the crimson-haired teen's neck. "You ready?" Naruto asked, wanting to make sure the kid was secure. "Less talking, more jumping," Konohamaru demanded with a cheer. Fair enough." Naruto walked back a couple of paces to give himself a better running start. With a quick inhale and exhale, the crimson-haired airbender was sprinting towards the edge, leaping off into a free fall. Naruto and Konohamaru laughed as they fell through a cloud, becoming slightly soaked from the moisture. Showing off his mastery with his bending, Naruto started to make himself and Konohamaru spin, using the wind to propel them towards a more flat-surfaced part of the mountain. The older bender twisted his body at the right moment, his shoes skidded against the gravel before a burst of wind sent them gliding through the air for just a moment, but it was long enough for Konohamaru to leap off Naruto's back to grab a stray vine, giving a cheeky grin to the older teen as he said, "Race you back to the village." Naruto couldn't help but shake his head with his smile still large and in place. He took Konohamaru up on his challenge, racing the younger bender back to the village by leaping through the treetops. Naruto did a triple flip as he fell through the air before landing with a crouch. Immediately taking off in a mad dash as Konohamaru continued to swing wildly over his head, cackling like a madman as he latched onto another vine. Their fast-paced race continued until Naruto spotted the side of his home's massive gates. The crimson-haired teen started to slow down to give Konohamaru the lead and eventual win. The young airbending child couldn't help but cheer, even with his face red from exhaustion. Giving his big brother figure a cheeky grin as he exclaimed, "Looks like I beat you this time." Naruto just smiled before gesturing to a bunch of kids similar to Konohamaru in age, "Run along. I'm sure you got lessons with the others soon. We'll train later." "You promise?" Konohamaru asked, wanting to make sure Naruto wouldn't forget. "I promise." Naruto swore before pushing the younger bender towards his friends and walking towards where he knew Asuma would be waiting. Naruto passed his fellow villagers with a kind wave and a smile. Well known and beloved by his small community of benders, Naruto was considered the heart and strength of the village, just as kind and generous as his mother, but strong and clever like his father. The crimson-haired teen walked into the spiritual chamber, where a giant statue of Yangchen stood proudly for all to see. Gazing up at the well-crafted piece was an olive-skinned man who looked like he belonged more with the Fire Nation than in a jungle-infested mountaintop. His short black spiky hair was held back by his bandana, but that didn't stop his sideburns from mixing with his well-groomed beard. Asuma, having heard Naruto approach, turned to face his pupil with an easygoing smile, a small pipe filled with earth tobacco resting in the corner of his mouth. "Hey, kid," Asuma greeted with a wave before turning his attention back to the Yangchen statue with a sigh. "Everything okay?" Naruto asked with a raised brow, also staring at the most famous avatar born from airbenders. Asuma turned to face the teen with a weak smile, his eyes looking tired as he said, "I hate to ask this, but some of the elders have been feeling sickly. I need you to go down to the nearby settlement and acquire some medicine. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't dire." Naruto didn't mind as the young man was always looking for an excuse to leave the village, and if he got to help the elders while he did so, then that was even better. So with a smile, he assured Asuma by saying, "It's fine, not like I haven't been there before." "Be careful," Asuma said to his pupil, giving him a pat on the back, then bowing to the Yangshin statue and leaving to take care of his own personal business. Naruto was silent as he stared at Yangshin, pondering if her spirit was watching over his people. Wondering how she felt about the massacre of the air nomads. So the airbenders' thoughts drifted to the Avatar and where they were, wondering when they would return, if they would return. Naruto bowed, showing his respect to the Avatar of the past before he left the spiritual chamber. After hours of walking, Naruto, standing on a large hill, could finally see the village that was far larger than his own, but this particular settlement was also heavily controlled by the Fire Nation, and yet Naruto didn't seem afraid. He actually looked excited to see something other than his own home, and even though Naruto was ecstatic to get closer, he paused. Naruto sighed before looking over his shoulder with an annoyed look. "I thought I told you to go to your studies, Konohamaru." Konohamaru, who had the decency to look sheepish, rubbed the back of his head as he weakly said, "Yeah, but it was just going to be Gramps rambling for hours. I know I would learn more with you, and I've never been this far outside the village before." Naruto sighed as he rubbed the back of his neck. A part of himself understood how Konohamaru felt, even thinking as long as the younger bender listened to him, then everything should be fine, but an even larger part of himself was telling him it was a bad idea and to send the boy home. "Please, Naruto." The teen found himself weakening under Konohamaru's hopeful gaze, finding it hard to say no to the boy whom he saw as a little brother. "Alright, but you have to listen to everything I say, and you have to stay by my side at all times. Understand?" "Yes." Konohamaru cheered, leaping into the air with the aid of his bending, only for Naruto to catch his leg, stopping the brown spiky-haired boy from getting too high. "And no bending. No matter the circumstances, especially in this place," Naruto scolded the younger bender. "I won't bend. I promise." Konohamaru swore, doing his best to reassure Naruto and prove it wasn't a mistake to let him come along. Naruto just nodded before gesturing for Konohamaru to follow as he walked towards the entrance, saying, "Come on." The crimson-haired bender nodded his head in greeting, and the guards nodded back, familiar enough with Naruto from his visits to assume the child with him was his younger sibling. The two hidden benders slowly walked through the market district of the Fire Nation village. Konohamaru's eyes were wide, and he could see people selling different types of scriptures, jewelry, and even animals. As they walked deeper and deeper into the marketplace, the scarf-wearing boy's nose started to twitch, and Konohamaru could smell something delicious. "Whoa," Konohamaru muttered as he ran slightly ahead of Naruto, stopping in front of a cart filled with many different types of sweets and cakes. "Do you want one?" Naruto asked after catching up with Konohamaru, pointing towards a thinly sliced cake with multiple layers. Konohamaru nodded enthusiastically, using his manners as he said, "Yes, please." Naruto smiled before holding 2 fingers for the baker as he requested, 2 of these. 2 slices of the 1,000-layer cake coming right up. The baker made sure to give his customers the freshest pieces, wrapping them in some napkins before handing one to Konohamaru and then one to Naruto. "That'll be 5 copper pieces, my boy." Naruto gave the baker the money as requested, thanking him before directing Konohamaru in the direction of the settlement's best shaman. Konohamaru, the ever-curious lad, couldn't help but ask, "Hey, Naruto, why are we going here?" "Because the woman who lives here makes medicine. I have to come here from time to time." Naruto explained as they walked closer and closer to what appeared to be an old shack that had clearly seen better days. "Oh," Konohamaru whispered before looking up at his older brother figure, eyes shining with admiration as he realized how much Naruto did for everyone. "You do a lot for everyone in the village, huh, big bro?" "I try to. Even though we're not related by blood, our bending connects in such a way, we're all practically family, and a family looks after one another." Konohamaru liked Naruto's exploration, it made his already close bond with his fellow villagers feel even closer. The 2 airbenders stopped in front of the rundown shack. Konohamaru tried to peek through one of the windows, curious as ever, but frowned when he couldn't see anything in the dark-looking room. Naruto knocked firmly 3 times before waiting for a response. "Enter." A woman's aged voice called out. Konohamaru felt some of his curiosity wander away as he hid slightly behind his older brother figure, following him inside. Candles were placed randomly to give a presence of illumination. Naruto, having remembered the layout of the shaman's shop, was able to step over and around all of her things that littered the ground. Konohamaru wasn't as lucky. The young lad closed his eyes in preparation for his face meeting the floor, but thankfully Naruto snatched the back of his shirt, keeping Konohamaru from hitting the ground. Thanks big bro." Konohamaru thanked the older airbender as he was placed back on his feet. Being more careful as he followed Naruto. 2 benders stopped in front of what could be considered a kitchen if it wasn't for all the plants, herbs and different bottles, all varying in size, that were filled with mysterious liquids. A woman had her back to the boys, humming a song to herself or she was until she called out, "Back so soon." "As much as I would love to say it's for your tea, who I'm more here on business." The local healer of the settlement turned around, revealing she was an elderly woman, dressed in green and grey robes. Konohamaru silently gasped, shocked to see who was missing an arm. Then what do you need? Something to clear the lungs. Some of the older people back home have been struggling to breathe at night. Naruto explained to the war-scarred elder. I think I have something for that. Who started to mumble to herself as she walked around her home, petting her pet as she did so. Said pet was a tiger lizard. A unique hybrid of animal that was half feline, half reptile. The big creature slicked across the floor towards Naruto, making Konohamaru feel nervous. The young lad pulled on the back of Naruto's grey robe, asking the older airbender, "Hey, big bro, do you mind if I wait outside?" Naruto could see Konohamaru was getting a little overwhelmed, but he also didn't want to let the kid out of his sight. Yet he couldn't seem to say no to his little brother, so with great reluctance, Naruto said, "Alright, just wait near the front door, but no wandering off. I won't be much longer." "Thanks, Naruto," Konohamaru said erroneously as he made his way out of the shop, this time managing not to nearly face the plant as the excited youth ran out of the shop. Inhaling deeply then exhaling with a big smile, taking a moment to truly admire the village that was much bigger than his own. Konohamaru did well to do as he was told, but he would be lying if he didn't say he was tempted a few times. A bunch of kids his age ran past, playing a cool game with a ball, and then Konohamaru overheard a conversation from a random couple walking past that there was going to be a big play in the middle of town square. The young bender sighed as he found a wooden crate to sit on, resting his elbows on his knees while he used his hands to hold up his chin. "I hope big bro doesn't take too long." Konohamaru sighed in boredom as he stared down at his feet, counting the cracks in the ground, stopping when he heard the builders across the street start to yell. Ropes attracted to a rig to help the men underneath lift a massive crane structure filled with roof tiles. Konohamaru's eyes widened as the ropes started to snap one by one until the massive plank holding the tiles fell. An older man who had been passing by the construction had no idea of the impending danger heading his way until it was too late. Tripping over his cane, the old man could only look upwards with fear towards his advancing doom. The elderly man waited and waited for his death, but nothing came. Slowly opening his eyes, he couldn't help but gasp at a sight he had only heard stories about as a child. An airbender, an actual living and breathing airbender, had saved his life. Konohamaru showed off his impressive skill, especially for a child his age, by using his impressive bending to stop the falling tiles and then move them away where they wouldn't do any harm. Konohamaru, after making sure the old man was alright, looked around to see everyone staring at him with wide eyes. The young boy's heart stopped as he realized what he had done. Konohamaru anxiously looked around, gnawing on his lip as he waited for the villagers to make the first move. "Airbender? He's an airbender." Shouts and murmurs of what Konohamaru did spread like wildfire. Within seconds Fire Nation guards were running into the area, all of them steadily surrounding the frightened child. "Stay right where you are, boy." Konohamaru nearly tripped over his own 2 feet, trying to back away from the armored men. His chest fell and rose like a cornered hare surrounded by ravenous wolves. Konohamaru thought it was all over when a powerful gust of wind sent all the guards flying back. Naruto landed with a crouch before rushing towards Konohamaru, while all the villagers and guards were stunned. Scooping his little brother up into his arms, Naruto continued his mad dash out of the large settlement. Using his mastery of air to avoid fireballs being sent his way. Spin kicking an air slash that sent 3 Fire Nation guards flying into a wall. A gong rang through the village, and a guard stationed near the wall that surrounded the settlements ordered for the gate to be closed immediately. Naruto quadrupled his speed, running so hard and fast that it felt like his legs were burning, but he didn't dare stop. He couldn't afford not to, especially with Konohamaru's life on the line. So he continued to push himself, growing closer to the closing exit. Knowing he wasn't going to make it, the bender channeled all his kai to his legs before leaping off the ground in a mighty burst of air. Naruto easily passed over the gates, the wind blowing his crimson locks wildly as the young master airbender landed with a grunt and a crouch. Not even waiting a moment before taking off once aging like a speeding ostrich horse. After what was a good 30 minutes of running, Naruto had to stop. Gently placing Konohamaru on the grassy ground as he took deep breaths, trying to steady his racing heart. "Are you alright, Konohamaru?" Naruto asked after managing to get his breathing back under control. When he didn't receive an answer, Naruto turned around to see the young bender covering his eyes with his arm, trying and failing to hide his tears. "Konohamaru." "Sabai, I'm sorry." Konohamaru still couldn't lift his face, even when Naruto gently moved his arm out of the way. The young bender couldn't help himself, running into Naruto's arms as he sobbed out, "It's all my fault." Naruto gently rubbed the younger bender's back, quietly consoling his fellow bender, assuring him by saying, "No, Konohamaru, it's not, I promise you, it's not." "What are we going to do?" Konohamaru questioned after pulling away from the hug that he really needed. Naruto sighed as he seriously replied, "We have to get back home as quickly as we can. I need to warn Asuma of what's happened." "Okay," Konohamaru whispered sadly, eyes looking unsure. "Hey, everything is going to be okay. I promise you won't get in trouble." Naruto reassured Konohamaru with one of his signature grins, tussling his brown spiky locks as he continued on, saying, "Come on, we need to go." It was now night and the stars had taken their place shining in the sky. Konohamaru had snuck out of his room, worried when he saw Naruto wasn't in his own quarters. Having an idea where his big brother might be, Konohamaru snuck towards the private chambers where the elders had their private meetings, having no trouble sneaking in through a window with his small size. Konohamaru hid behind a pillar, gasping as he saw Naruto in the middle of the room, kneeling with his head bowed. "Is what you're saying true, Naruto?" Hiruzen, Konohamaru's grandfather and Asuma's father, questioned sadly. Putting aside his long pipe to lean forward and thread his fingers together in thought. "Yes," Naruto whispered honestly, and yet it was still loud enough for all those present to hear. Hiruzen sighed as he stroked his beard, looking worried as he muttered, that is quite troubling. Quite troubling indeed." Asuma stepped forward, calling out to his pupil, "Naruto, please be honest with everyone. How did this happen? How did our secrecy get out?" "I went to the nearby village as requested." Naruto said before stopping, sighing as he didn't meet any of the elders or Asuma's gaze as he confessed, "I had the medicine, and when I was ready to leave, there was a construction accident. A man was about to die, but I used my airbending to save his life." "You put the lives of everyone here in jeopardy for one man." A woman, Kaharu, who was seated next to Hiruzen, screeched, staring down at Naruto scathingly. "Foolish boy. Are you not aware of what your actions may bring? Fire will once again be at our doorsteps. The last of the airbenders will be gone." A man covered in scars roared, glaring with his remaining eye, as the right side of his face was covered in bandages to hide the side with his missing organ. Asuma was quick to come to Naruto's defense, standing next to his student as he barked, "Hold on. There is no guarantee that they know where we are. Naruto made a mistake, a big one, but he has done nothing but do what was asked of him, since he was old enough to walk on his own." Anzo scoffed as he rebutted by saying, "Nevertheless, what was done today cannot be undone. I say send the boy away and be done with it." Hiruzen seemed taken aghast by what his closest friend was suggesting. Leaning forward in his seat, he exclaimed, "What? Danzo, you can't be serious." Danzo never lost his cold scowl, holding strong to his feelings by responding, "I am. Hiruzen, we must do what we must in order to survive. Just like our forefathers did that survived the great massacre. Our forefathers would not have abandoned a child to such a fate," was Hiruzen's aggressive reply as he glared daggers at his oldest friend. Kaharu took her chance to interject, reminding everyone by saying, "Every second the boy remains, we risk the Fire Nation finding where we are and killing us all. Something must be done." Anzo's face softened for the first time when he saw the deep turmoil tearing apart his oldest and closest friend. Deciding the correct approach was to be less firm with Hiruzen. The war-scarred elder tried to convince his friend, "Hiruzen, the suffering of our people and death of our culture will all be for nothing if we're all dead. We do what we must to survive." Hiruzen sighed as he brought a wrinkled hand to his head, rubbing his brow as he felt so tired and disappointed that he was running out of options to help Naruto. "Father, please." Asuma started to plead towards his father, only to be cut off by his own student. "I'll do it," Naruto stated as he rose from his kneeling position, standing tall next to his teacher as he stared the elders down. More than willing to accept his fate. "Naruto." The leader of the remaining airbenders sighed, removing his hand so he could look Naruto in the eyes. What he wasn't prepared to see was the boy's father, Minato, standing by his side with a disappointed gaze. Hiruzen blinked and found Minato was nowhere in sight. His own inner guilt and eyes playing tricks didn't help with the impending decision. And yet, when he looked the young man who he saw a grandson in the eyes, he didn't see resentment or hate. He saw the same love and kindness Naruto had always had for the village, even with his unfortunate fate creeping closer. "Do you understand what you are saying?" Hiruzen asked with a sad frown. His heart broke when he saw the briefest form of hesitation and fear in Naruto's eyes, before it was hidden by a strong determination. "I'm willing to do what I must to protect everyone from my mistake," Naruto reassured as he gave a weak smile, one that he hoped comforted Asuma and Hiruzen, but given the situation, there was little comfort to be found. "Then so be it. Naruto, son of Minato and Kushina, will be banished for the protection and survival of the remaining airbenders. You must leave by dusk." Hiruzen ordered, but it was clear his heart wasn't in it. He looked more tired and older than he'd felt in decades. Naruto didn't say much else, simply bowing towards Hiruzen before leaving and returning to his own personal quarters to collect his things. Naruto slid aside the long piece of cloth that was used as a makeshift door, stopping when he saw Konohamaru sitting with his head down waiting for him. "You're really going to leave?" Konohamaru confirmed with a voice that was filled with sorrow and disappointment in his own actions. Blaming himself far too harshly for the newfound fate that fell upon the older teen. Naruto took a knee to comfort his little brother and he regretfully said, "I'm afraid so. I'm so sorry. If I just listened." Konohamaru began before falling silent, still unable to meet the older bender's gaze. "You have nothing to be sorry for," Naruto told his little brother honestly as he wiped away his tears. Giving an honest grin as he said, "Konohamaru, if you have the opportunity to help someone in need, then you absolutely should. You did the right thing." Naruto was more than ready for Konohamaru's quick and tight hug. Wrapping his arms tight around his fellow bender, letting out a small tear of his own when he heard Konohamaru's heartbroken, "I'm going to miss you. I'll miss you too. Very much." Naruto said before rising to his full height and packing a sack full of food, a map, and some money he had put away for himself. Something he acquired from one of his duties of selling vegetables and fruits that the villagers had grown to the nearby settlement. Naruto gestured for Konohamaru to follow him, asking, "Come see me off?" The brown scarf-wearing boy managed a shaky nod. Staying mostly silent as he followed Naruto out of his hut, passing by all their fellow airbenders who also came to say goodbye. Many were shedding a tear, for they knew how hard Naruto worked and appreciated everything he did to support and help his fellow benders. Many of the older members of the village found it hard to say goodbye as they had seen Naruto grow from a boy into the strong young man he was today. Naruto, seeing Konohamaru with his head down once more, patted the lad on the shoulder. Grinning as he confidently said, "Hey, don't be sad. I know we'll see each other again." "We will. How can you know?" Konohamaru questioned with hope shimmering in his eyes. "I can feel it here." Naruto warmly assured as he placed his hand on his own chest, more specifically, over his heart. His words meant more than simple sentiment because while he would be going, all their shared memories and time together wouldn't be forgotten. It's something that they would always share and an oath that their connection as brothers would always remain. Even still, Konohamaru couldn't help but ask his big brother, "You promise?" Naruto nodded, briefly glancing at everyone who came to see him off. Hiruzen and his master were included in the small crowd of people. Patting Konohamaru on the back, Naruto assured his fellow bender, saying, "I promise, but I need you to look after everyone for me until I get back." "I will," Konohamaru promised as all his tears finally dried up, standing as tall and as bravely as a child could. "Good man," Naruto said fondly before turning his attention to his teacher and, for the longest time, father figure. "I guess this is goodbye for now." Asuma surprised Naruto by pulling his student in for a quick hug and a strong pat on the back. Pulling back to smile sadly at the crimson-haired bender, "Take care of yourself." "I will. Goodbye everyone, I'll miss you all." Naruto proudly proclaimed as he waved goodbye to his fellow airbenders. Naruto was the first to look away, walking at a decent pace away from his home and away from everything he knew. A freedom that Naruto always wanted but now found daunting, especially since he didn't have a home to go back to. After hours of walking, Naruto found himself back at his favorite bonsai tree on the mountaintop. Unsure of what to do, all the crimson-haired bender could do was sit and think. For the first time in his life, Naruto felt unsure in himself and his future. The freedom he always desired was finally in his grasp, and yet, it had never felt more intimidating than it did at this current moment. "Maybe I should shut my eyes for a couple hours," Naruto thought as wrapped himself tight, finding a perfect spot in the tree where he could rest and not fear of turning in his sleep and falling to the harsh earth below. Naruto's soft blue eyes started to steadily close as a star-filled sky illuminated itself beautifully above his now slumbering head. The crimson-haired airbender awoke to find he was no longer resting on his favorite tree, but instead surrounded by nothing but ice. A great tundra of snow surrounded Naruto, and yet, he didn't feel a thing. Not even his breath was visible in the supposed freezing weather. Naruto's shoes crunched the snow beneath their soles, leaving a trail of footprints as the banished bender walked through the thick snow towards what looked like an old tower made from ice and waterbending. A large trail of steps lead Naruto towards the entrance of the temple, sealed shut by beautifully crafted heavy oak doors. Naruto looked around before pushing against a massive door with both hands, grunting as it slowly moved until it was wide enough for Naruto to slip through. The inside was even more beautiful and well kept, but what was odd was the massive spring housing on a small island that was bountiful with lush green grass. Naruto, seemingly unconcerned by the water, started to walk across the still and clear liquid, creating ripples with every step. When Naruto reached the island, he was surprised to find he wasn't alone. On the contrary, there was a girl here, and she was so beautiful. Naruto couldn't take his eyes off her even if he tried. He was far too enchanted by her smooth brown skin and her silky white hair, but none of that could compare to her eyes. Two crystal pools that held a hidden strength and yet so much kindness. The blue on her furred clothing was a clear indicator that she was from one of the water tribes, but the fineness of the cloth and stitching suggested she wasn't a commoner. Naruto felt his heart rate steadily start to increase the closer he got to the mysterious girl. Soon, he found himself sitting next to her, staring at two large koi swimming in perfect harmony. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" The mysterious girl with beautiful white hair questioned, batting her eyes at the confused but intrigued airbender. "They are." Naruto agreed, admiring the swimming koi for another moment before turning to face the white-haired royal, asking, "Am I dreaming?" She giggled at his question, arching a brow as she asked, "Do you feel like you're awake?" Naruto looked away shyly, chuckling as he ran a hand through his crimson locks as he said, "I'm definitely not awake." "Then you must be dreaming," was her quick response as she gave a small cheeky smile, turning her attention back towards the koi. "But I've never had a dream like this before," Naruto muttered quietly as he gently rested his hand on the grass, smiling at the ticklish sensation on his palm. The mysterious girl's smile turned more remorseful and sad as she softly uttered, "That's because you weren't about to awaken, but now you are." "Do you mean I'm going to wake up?" Naruto questioned, confused on why the beautiful stranger seemed so sorrowful, as if she knew something bad had happened. Naruto felt his skin tingle as she gently caressed his cheek, rubbing her thumb in a soothing manner as she whispered, "Just know, there was nothing you could have done to stop what was coming, and it wasn't your fault." "What do you mean? What's going to happen?" Naruto asked, but she was interrupted by the koi's glowing brightly. They started to swim more aggressively, making gentle ripples into whirling tides. Naruto jumped to his feet, reaching his hand out for the mysterious girl, only to find she was gone. Naruto yelled as he was swept by the raging currents, closing his eyes and holding his breath as he was pulled under the water. Naruto covered his mouth with both hands, managing to weakly peek open his eyes, which soon widened dramatically at the glowing ice sphere that was floating right in front of him. He could make out the large form of some horned creature and, outstandingly enough, what looked to be a kid with glowing eyes and an arrowhead tattoo that traveled from his forehead over to the back of his skull and down towards his clenched fists that were currently pressed together. Naruto reached out towards the ice sphere, but the water started to swirl and drag Naruto down deeper and deeper until there was nothing but blackness. Just when it felt like Naruto could no longer hold his breath, he roughly landed on a rocky surface, no longer submerged by the intense waves. The water splashed to the ground as the crimson-haired airbender caught his breath, looking around cautiously as he carefully rose to his feet. Naruto was quiet as slowly traveled through the rocky terrain, briefly stopping when he heard the sound of giggling. He passed by great protruding boulders until he stopped at the sight of another mysterious girl he had never seen before. She was standing next to a giant badger mole, gently patting the massive beast like it was a pet. Naruto thought she might be his age or close to it, and not wanting to scare her, Naruto slowly walked around the corner, waving as he cautiously said, "Hey." She turned around to face him, her long midnight black hair flowing in the wind. It was only then that Naruto noticed the whiteness of her eye. She was blind and yet, Naruto had the feeling she knew where he was given the way she was following his movements perfectly. Naruto once again went to call out to the mysterious girl when she interrupted him by creating an earth wall. Naruto sighed before slowly turning and looking around the canyon he now found himself in. Naruto took a step toward his exit, jumping back when he was surrounded by a wall of fire that was quickly spreading until he was trapped on all sides. The dangerous flames continued to rise until it seemed like it was reaching the clouds in the sky, and before the crimson-haired benders shook eyes, the fire turned a roaring but majestic blue. The flames briefly parted, and Naruto's gaze met another stranger he didn't know. He couldn't make out much of her appearance-wise, but he found her eyes gorgeous but far more intense than anything Naruto had ever seen. The flames started to spin until the airbender was surrounded by a tower of fire that imploded on itself. Naruto awoke with a gasp, clutching his chest as he looked around frantically. Leaning back into the comfort of the bonsai branches, he steadied his racing heart. He wiped away the cold sweat that built up on his brow, shaking away his jitters as he leapt onto the cliffside, sighing as a cool wind ruffled his clothes. Naruto looked across the mountaintops to see the sunrise peeking over the horizon, giving the clouds a pink hue. It was beautiful until black smoke blocked Naruto's view of the sunrise. Naruto followed the trail of smoke, his heart stopping once he saw it was coming from his village. "Those spirits know," Naruto whispered as he took off running towards his home. Compressing and bending the air around himself in a way that only propelled Naruto faster towards the danger. His ragged breathing and footsteps rang heavy in Naruto's ears, it left him unfocused and even slightly unbalanced. The wall of his home came into view, and so did the hope that, perhaps, he was worrying about nothing and that everyone would be okay, but that hope was crushed when he saw broken and burnt gates. With shaking hands, Naruto pushed the remaining standing gate to the side and he was left horrified by what he found. Ashes. His home was burned to the ground. Naruto couldn't bring himself to stare at the charred corpses, but the dead Fire Nation soldiers had his full attention. There was a sense of pride that his people fought strongly and proudly, but it was greatly overshadowed by the loss and wish that some of them managed to flee. Yet, Naruto knew deep down they were all gone. The young bender stopped walking as his feet kicked up a piece of wool from under the ashes. Naruto crouched with his head bowed, obscuring his eyes as he reached out towards the blue piece of fabric. His hand shook until it grasped a familiar piece of clothing. Slowly, he pulled his hand back, revealing more and more, until it confirmed Naruto's horrified suspicions. It was Konohamaru's scarf. No, 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 no. Naruto whispered as tears silently trailed down his chin, falling in small little droplets onto Konohamaru's scarf. Naruto cried as he brought his little brother's scarf to his chest. Snap. The Fire Nation soldier silently cursed, briefly glancing down at his feet to see he had stepped on a bone, snapping the skeletal remains in his haste to quietly approach the distracted bender. Glancing back up, the Fire Nation soldier froze as he saw Naruto was now standing and staring directly at him. His eyes, those dark blue eyes, they stared directly into the soldier's soul, and his instincts were screaming at him to run. Hi. We're retreating back down the mountain soon. Where are you? A new soldier who had come looking for his fellow fire bender paused at the sight of Naruto. Unlike his companion, he was not hesitant to light his hands ablaze while screaming at the top of his lungs, "Airbender." Naruto was the first to break into action. A cloud of dust was left in his wake as he was in front of the soldiers who massacred his people in mere seconds. He didn't leave them any time to react, he bent the air to send the two men flying in different directions. One man was smart enough to take his military knife and stab it into the ground before he was fully sent off the cliffside. His friend, Kai, wasn't so lucky. Screaming as he fell to his doom, alerting the once retreating force of 30 Fire Nation soldiers. Naruto didn't buckle or flinch at the sound of men and women running towards his position. Instead, he started to breathe, moving his arms with the flow of the wind until it was under his control. The air constricted and started to spin rapidly, spinning until Naruto had successfully created a tornado made from airbending. Naruto threw his tornado towards the charging soldiers. Ash was sucked up and pulled into the miniature disaster. Many men and women were shocked and then unable to see, thanks to the massive spinning force creating a giant cloud of gray. Those blinded were unable to defend themselves, and those that weren't barely managed to escape barely unscathed. Naruto used the ash cloud to his advantage. Using his quickness to strike his dazed and confused opponents with powerful bursts of air. Naruto pushed away the conflict he felt from taking all these lives. The desire to avenge his people was too great, it left him blind to the incoming danger. The high-pitched hissing sound along with a flash was the only warning the distressed airbender received before a combustion explosion burst right beside Naruto in a titanic explosion of flames. Boom. The top half of Naruto's martial arts robes were torn to shreds, and it was only his quick thinking of making a barrier of air that saved him from being seriously burnt. Naruto grunted as he was sent crashing to the ground, slightly stunned but still reactive enough to dodge the wave of fire sent his way by the remaining Fire Nation soldiers. Leaping through the air, Naruto briefly saw 5 additional firebenders he hadn't seen before, but they were dressed differently than the others. Wearing very little armor but instead mainly red and black robes with light armor shielding their vitals. They all had a similar unique look to them, shaven heads and a crimson tattoo that almost resembled an eye. The only one who was slightly different was the woman, who had her hair pulled back in a ponytail and the side of her head shaved to match her brethren. Once again, high-pitched hissing was the only warning Naruto had of the incoming combustions. Explosions missed his body by mere meters as he dived to the ground, using his mastery of air to propel himself next to a large squadron of soldiers. Naruto showed his swiftness and flexibility with his bending as his hands, currently braced against the ground, was used for balance and mobility to swing his body and, more importantly, his legs to create devastating wind slashes. Soldiers screamed in fury, trying to combat against bending they had no experience of. Naruto was a master at his age for a reason and showed off his amazing bending power by swinging his right hand over his head and then pointing it directly at anyone who stood in his way. Those that could brace themselves against what felt like a hurricane to the face, but many were not quick nor strong enough to hold themselves steady and quickly followed their fellow soldiers to a free-falling demise. The last remaining hidden airbender counted down who was left and was pleased to see only 3 Fire Nation soldiers remained, but those 5 benders with a strange form of firebending were more or less left unscathed and, by the way they were walking forward, were more than ready to keep on fighting. Naruto, in a quick act of thinking, snapped a non-burnt and wooden pole off a piece of nearby destroyed rubble, using it as a temporary makeshift staff. Naruto's adaptability was astounding as he used his temporary staff in such a way one might think he had been using it for years. Naruto was a natural as he effortlessly made wind blades with every swipe of the staff. The 5 combustion benders were impressed by the display, taking cover and leaving the remaining Fire Nation soldiers to fend for themselves. All skilled men in their own right, they were simply no match for Naruto. Now, only 5 remained. Naruto twirled his staff before holding it with both hands, pointing the broken sharp tip at who Naruto assumed was the leader. A tall bearded man packed with muscle. The leader of the combustion benders nodded his head forward, ordering 2 of his men to attack Naruto together, while the rest of them took positions covering 3 different escaping points. Essentially caging and cornering Naruto to the cliff side. The 2 combustion benders thought they would have the advantage with the first strike, but the crimson-haired airbending beat them to it by attacking first, while dodging the hot flame sent his way in retaliation. The last of the hidden nomads fell into a more defensive role as he countered or slapped away every physical strike with his staff, but even Naruto could admit they were powerful benders. Their flames were ferocious as they were hot, coming in quick powerful bursts, hoping to incinerate whatever they made contact with. Naruto, needing to create some form of room for himself to better bend, threw his staff into the air, briefly drawing the attention of all the combustion benders, giving Naruto the necessary time he needed to sweep his hands towards himself, before throwing his hands outwards with his palms flat, creating a dome of air that expanded outwards in an explosive burst. Sending the 2 combustion benders flying backwards. Naruto, not done with his counter-assault, caught his falling staff and, with a powerful swipe, sent out another air slash, possibly the biggest he's created so far, and sent the unsuspecting combustion bender into a building that hadn't been fully demolished yet. Another air slash made sure the destroyed structure rained rubble on the dazed and bruised bender underneath. Burying the man and giving Naruto the advantage to fight the other bender one-on-one. The scarred combustion bender snarled, flames shooting out of his nose as he rushed at Naruto with the intent to burn the airbender to ashes. Naruto maneuvered around the combustion benders, flaming punches and devastating leg sweeps that sent out a burst of uncontrollable fire. Naruto parted the flames with a single slash of his staff, but the combustion bender used that to his advantage to rush Naruto, knocking the staff out of the crimson-haired airbender's hand. The staff flew through the air before landing a couple of meters away from the clashing benders. Naruto, while temporarily weaponless and starting to feel exhausted both physically and mentally, was still formidable enough to put his opponent on the back foot. It was as if the strength of the fallen and of his ancestors was flowing through him and helping him fight. Naruto, acting quickly, moved into his enemy's personal space and swiped both his hands towards the scarred man's ears. The compressed wind hitting his inner beep left the man discombobulated and enraged. He screamed as he held his ringing ears before turning his attention to Naruto, who was standing still. The combustion bender inhaled deeply, his eyes shaking from a mixture of fire and pain. The scarred man's aim was off, but that didn't matter. He needed Naruto dead. Naruto found it effortless to leap to the left, dodging the combustion explosion before leaping to the right as the ground where he was standing burst apart. Unknowingly to the combustion bender, he was falling for Naruto's genius plan. The last of the hidden airbenders landed in front of the rubble where he sent his earlier opponent, seething up his trap and hopefully elongating a problem before it had a chance to rise. The scarred combustion bender shook his head to rid himself of his confusion and blurry vision, squinting his eyes as he could make out a figure on top of the rubble, and in his haste to eliminate Naruto, he didn't realize he was aiming at his own comrade until it was too late. Naruto yelled as he ran towards the dazed bender, who was now frozen in shock from killing his own comrade. Leaping through the air with both feet pointed towards the master firebender, Naruto channeled his Kai down towards his legs, sending out a massive burst of air towards the man's unguarded body. Sending the combustion bender kipping across the earth like a pebble on the water until he crashed harshly into one of the village's semi-destroyed gates. His body was left mangled and broken. Naruto dived out of the way as one of the 3 remaining combustion benders tried to attack him from a distance while he was distracted, but Naruto was faster, diving out of the way while throwing an air blast underneath himself to push his body towards the staff that was thrown out of his hands. Naruto felt relief when it was in his grasp once more, twirling his makeshift weapon and then using the air swirling around the edge to bat away another quickly approaching combustion blast. A second blast was quickly approaching, and with a lack of time to move, Naruto did the only thing he was able to do to protect himself by creating an air barrier, but at the cost of his staff being destroyed. When the bending technique hit its intended target, a massive explosion rocked the mountaintop, and from the aftermath of the explosion, Naruto's body flew from the smoke cloud, rolling against the ground until his weak form skidded to a stop at the very edge of the cliff. The last 3 combustion benders approached cautiously, but made sure there was no chance of Naruto escaping. Drip. Naruto breathed raggedly as blood trickled from a cut above his brow, trailing like a red waterfall down his cheek and onto the rocky earth below. "It's over, Airbender, you've lost," the leader of the combustion benders stated. Taking in Naruto's bruised and bloody appearance, finding the young bender's strength and determination commendable, perhaps even admirable. The bald bearded man nodded his head in respect as he acknowledged Naruto's strength, saying, "You may die knowing you fought honorably." Naruto didn't respond. He didn't say anything. He just rose, choosing to face his enemies and possibly death alongside them. Enter the void, become wind. Now, Naruto wasn't sure why he started to think of Gurul Agima or his poems. Perhaps it was because of his concussion, perhaps it was the only thing he could think of that would bring him peace in this moment. Whatever the case, Naruto started to slowly close his eyes and match his breathing with the air rustling his clothes. He truly felt the wind as it flowed around his body in a way he wasn't used to. A way he wasn't used to commanding. He felt free. The last two remaining combustion benders followed their leader by inhaling deeply and preparing to launch their attack on his signal. The bearded bender was the first to launch his blast, and the rumbling of his remaining allies soon followed. Their combined combustion explosions reduced the area Naruto was standing on to smithereens and, in their minds, guaranteeing his death. It's done. The leader of the combustion benders thought to himself. Turning around and beginning his long walk home with his remaining comrades. However, something made him pause mid-step. A dark shadow, and yet there were no buildings, no structures, no trees, nothing. Nothing in the surrounding area could create such a strange phenomenon. The man started to crane his neck back, unprepared for the sight he would see. Floating high in the sky with his arms spread and his back to the ground was none other than Naruto himself. Flying without the need for a sky bison or a glider, flying just like the great Gurul Agima. The leader of the combustion benders' eyes were shaking, for they couldn't believe what was happening before them. It was impossible to achieve such a feat, but here Naruto was, doing the impossible. The glint of the golden sun helped the bald bearded bender see Naruto's face more clearly, leaving him further stunned when the look on the young airbender's face reminded him of the men he saw in the opium houses near the Earth Kingdom border. That look on his face, he's high. The great feeling of unease coursed through his veins, a fear he couldn't quite explain. It started to build as Naruto slowly turned his head, locking eyes with the frozen combustion bender. Naruto slowly turned his body so he was facing the stunned combustion benders, slowly moving his arms as he quietly thought to himself, "Is this how you felt when you discovered flight for the first time, Agima? I didn't know it would feel like this. Hiruzen, Asuma, Konohamaru, I'm sorry. I don't think I have it in me to be angry or even vengeful at this moment. I just feel so wonderful." The female combustion bender thought it was best to attempt to take out Naruto while he was still in his high state. Inhaling and channeling her Kai to its peaking point, she was prepared to release her biggest explosion yet. Then Naruto moved, gone in a blink of an eye, floating in front of the stunned woman. Not wanting to waste her chance, she let her devastating attack loose, but in doing so, sealed her fate. Naruto caught and redirected the attack with a single hand. Using his airbending to keep the blast contained before sending it back at point-blank range, killing the female combustion bender with her own move. Amiko. The bearded combustion bender screamed out the name of his dead squadmate. His last remaining ally set both his feet and fists ablaze, charging at Naruto with a furious roar. The bearded combustion bender attempted to halt his charging friend with a shout of his name, "Han, stop." But Han would not deter himself until his vengeance was stated, until the last airbender was dead. He used his roaring flames to send himself high in the air, inhaling deeply for what would be his largest combustion blast yet, but against the now awakened Naruto, he might have well been a novice. The crimson-haired airbender was far too quick, appearing before Han and, with a quick series of moves, sending air rapidly into the man's lungs. Han's eyes turned bloodshot as his lungs exploded from the sudden inflation. He lost concentration on his technique, causing glowing cuts to appear along his face before his body combusted within itself, killing him instantly. Now the bearded combustion bender was the only one left of his squad, of his people, just like Naruto. A mutual understanding of loss was now shared between the two benders, but that didn't mean anything was forgiven. "Hey," Naruto called out to the bearded man. His posture wasn't immediately hostile, if anything it was still quite relaxed, but that didn't mean the last remaining Fire Nation soldier could keep his guard down, even when the young airbender said, "Before we end this, I need to know. Why did you kill all my people? What was the reason?" A deep sigh rumbled the giant of a man's chest. He frowned as he knew his answer wouldn't satisfy the crimson-haired teen, but he was honest when he replied, "Because we were ordered to." "I see." Naruto whispered, with a false smile. Then he charged. Ready to end it once and for all. Their final clash was nothing short of a battle of the elements, but instead of the air fanning the flames, it overpowered and smothered them. When their duel was concluded, the bearded bender was left on his back, eyes white, missing both an arm and a leg. It was finally done. Naruto sighed as he limped away from the battlefield, stopping to pick up Konohamaru's scarf. It was slightly singed from the battle but otherwise unharmed. Naruto was silent as he wrapped the blue wool scarf around his neck, so lost in his thoughts that he didn't know where he was walking until he wandered into the relatively undestroyed spiritual chamber that housed the massive statue of Yangshin. Naruto gazed upon the statue with a defeated gaze before kneeling before the only piece of his culture that wasn't destroyed. But just as all hope seems lost, something extraordinary happened. Yangshin's eyes glowed brightly, an unexplainable presence was felt, and through that presence, a single message was conveyed. "The Avatar has returned," Naruto whispered, rising to his feet as he approached Yangshin's statue with some hesitance. He was unsure if he was fooling himself into believing something that wasn't entirely confirmed, or if he was clinging to a small hope that there was another airbender out there and he wasn't alone. After hours of debating with himself, Naruto found the remainder of his things that weren't destroyed during the battle, but first, he would write down the name of every man, woman and child who used to live in the village he loved so much. Making a memorial for those who unfairly and unjustly lost their lives in this horrid attack. Naruto had his head bowed as he silently prayed, "I hope you are all in a better place. Please guide and watch over me as I go to find the Avatar." With those being his final words, Naruto said a silent goodbye to his home and the people who once inhabited it. Starting his journey to explore the bending nations and find the Avatar. So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video. Bye bye.